Thank you, Brian. Thanks for all of you coming. Sitting here and listening to your stories, it's two things strike me. First of all, how similar the stories are where I work on the west coast of Canada. And secondly, realizing, and I'm really honored to be in the presence of such courage, because, the only way things have ever changed is by doing exactly what you're doing, having the courage to come forward and talk and confronting these bastards, because they do it all over the world. So, I'm honored. The work I do with Aboriginal people and poor people in Vancouver, it really doesn't matter who it happens to. The thing that I've realized over the years is that this is all tops of a big iceberg, and what that iceberg is a multi-billion-dollar industry around the world in child trafficking. And the foster care system, the adoption agency, is all part of the big child trafficking system. In the United States alone, they figure $100 billion a year is made in this industry, and 100,000 kids go missing. And what we found on the west coast of Canada is the way that happens is, as you yourself have experienced, it happens right within the system of government social work. We documented in Canada, actually 2 weeks after I published an article about that, 2 days after I published an article about that, these two guys attacked me in the street for no particular reason. This kind of thing happens all the time when you're getting close to something. But what the article indicated was that right within the Child Family Services system in Vancouver, there's social workers, psychiatrists, and police that operate that target particularly vulnerable, especially single women, working with, with their kids. They isolate those mothers. They beat them down psychologically through parental alienation techniques that you're describing. Then they can take their kids, and by taking the kids, you alienate them, just like happened in the Indian boarding schools. It's the same system. They alienate the kids at a young age from the family. The police then have a justification to go in later, and these kids are trafficked all over the world. As a matter of fact, in Vancouver, we found that it's actually part of the organ trafficking system that you know about in China, where so many people, the organ trafficking is a big industry around the world too, and they need young organs. So frankly, when children go missing, it's because of that as well. So, it's a horrible thing to look at, and the only way we can ever get the truth out is by people coming forward and talking. When I began to surface this in the Indian boarding school systems in Canada, I lost my job. I was a Protestant clergyman, and I got thrown out of the church, and Family Services came after me and took my two young daughters and gave them to my ex-wife. And it's that kind of targeting of people who are coming out and telling the truth that you're all experiencing as well. And it's not accidental, because what you represent is a threat to their system just by telling the truth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a little 10-minute clip from a documentary we did about the Indian boarding schools. But you can see by listening to the stories of these people how similar it is all over the world and how it's really indicating the same system. So I want to show you this, and then maybe we can talk more about this and have questions. Because I'm working right now, I should explain, there's 5 countries where I'm working with people like yourselves. There's the United States, Canada, Ireland, England, and Italy, where I just was. We just had, you've been reading, I guess, about the difficulties the Pope has been having. But it has to do with, and unfortunately that's the way the media spins it all the time, the poor church is having all these scandals. Well, the reality is, he wrote a document when he was a cardinal ordering bishops and priests under pain of excommunication to conceal evidence of the abuse of children, and that policy is still in the books. So if you have a child who's abused in a Catholic church, you'll never know about it because the priest is ordered, or he'll go to hell, in quotes, ordered to suppress that and not tell the police. Now that's standing policy. It's one of the reasons we're working with people in Italy, because it's institutionalized pedophilia, and it's a crime. And I know people in this country were actually circulating a petition asking the Pope to be arrested if he came to this country and be put on trial for colluding in that crime. Right. So, anyway, so part of the work I see now me doing is crossing borders, because we're dealing with an international system of child trafficking and abuse, and we have to be united across borders. So that's one of the reasons I'm here, and I thank you for receiving me. So let's look at this, and then we can talk more, I hope. This is from a film we did 3 years ago. It's called Unrepentant. It's about the Indian boarding school system in Canada, and it's been seen all over the world.
I know a lot of you people out there don't understand, but there's a need for the world to know about this, because the church is hiding and the government's hiding. There is a lot of people that died in those places.
When the Lord your God brings you into the land you are entering to possess, and drives out before you many nations, and you have defeated them, then you must destroy them totally. Make no treaty with them, and show them no mercy. Do not allow any of them to live. This is what you are to do to them. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, cut down their trees, and burn them in the fire. For you are a people chosen by the Lord over all others on the face of the earth.
When God is on our side, we can commit any crime. We're absolved individually from that crime by believing that we have a higher sanction. And that's the danger of religion, in that it allows people to do that. It allows them to kill without a shred of conscience.
The church knows where our children are buried. 50,000 died.
Even in the sunlight, the Alberni Valley was draped in fog that first morning I arrived there in the spring of 1992. Jesus once said that when we welcome the stranger, we're actually welcoming him. But how could I have known that by opening my door to him and to so many others, I would be closing the door to all that I knew? Nothing was clear to me at first. I felt like I was on the brink of something, like standing on a dock, waiting. What was clear was that I was heading for a job interview at St. Andrew's United Church in Port Alberni, on Canada's west coast, where I hoped to become the minister. When I walked through the doors of that church, I knew there was a deeper purpose that had brought me there. And sure enough, I got the job.
There were no Native people in my church when I got there. You know, there was like 20 people in the pews on a Sunday, and they were all white. They were like retired loggers and millwrights, and about a third of the population was Native, and there were no Indians in any of the white churches. There were no Indians working in the stores anywhere, you know. It was just a totally apartheid, and it still is. It's very much an apartheid kind of community. And that's actually one of the things that got me interested. Just a little anecdote. When I went up at the end of the first service, I went up to the chair of my board and I said, you know, Fred, it's kind of odd there aren't any Indians around, you know, like where are they all? And he got really defensive and he said, well, they keep to themselves, we keep to ourselves, and everybody likes it that way. And so when I went out to I got called out to the local Seychat Reserve to conduct a wedding a few weeks later. I asked a man who I was marrying, Danny Gus his name was. He was a retired native fisherman and he had gone to the Alberni school. And I asked him kind of innocently why there were no Native people in church. And he finally said to me, they killed my best friend in the residential school. He's buried on the hill out back. And the church people all know it. They don't want us in their church. So it's kind of like right away, bang, it was in my face. This reality, these two worlds living side by side, not just Native and white, but kind of an official world, the official history, and then the unofficial buried history.
But Danny Gus wasn't the only Indian who told me of murders in my church's residential school. In my first year as minister at St. Andrews, I spent most of my time just visiting people and getting to know them. That was my job.
And my first job was really to open up my church to as many people as possible, including the native population. In doing that, as more and more people came into the church, I gave them a platform. They began to talk about crimes they witnessed in the Alberni Residential School, which was run by the United Church for over 50 years. And they described children being killed. They described pedophile rings where children were being passed around between the Indian agent and the priest and other people like that. Yeah, I had an open pulpit policy, so after my sermon, people could get up and comment on it or share any of their own thoughts in that. And in the native...
What did the whites do?
Well, the whites would get up, occasionally a logger would get up and defend the logging and that kind of thing. And, people had the chance to say whatever they wanted. And native people in their tradition, they have like speakers who are officially delegated to talk. And so to give you an example, there was a man, Alfred Kietla, who got up and began praying in his own language in church, which was quite something. It was quite beautiful when he did that. But then as speaker, he began to talk about other things, and other people who got up would then share stories of children being murdered in the Alberni Residential School. That was later confirmed by a woman called Harriet Nahani, who actually witnessed a murder of a little girl by the principal of the Alberni School in 1946. Well, this fellow who Harriet claims killed a little girl called Maisie Shaw, his name was Alfred Caldwell, and his daughter was right in the congregation. She was part of the old guard of my church.
Did you believe it?
Well, when people who don't know one another keep telling the same story over and over again, even if you're skeptical, you have to accept the fact that, it's a commonly told story. And when people began to go further and tell me things that I found later being validated in documents, then you can't deny it. As a minister, you learn to detect bullshit pretty quickly in people. And you can tell in somebody's eyes when they're suffering, and it's incredibly painful for them to tell a story. They're not making this stuff up.
My name's Harry Wilson.
My name's Kenny Quittel.
My name is Virginia Baptiste. I'm from the Osuyus Indian Band in Oliver, BC.
My name is Harry Lucas. I'm actually 64 years old.
My name is Tibayut from the House of Tibayut of Achida.
My name is Nangkreska. I come from the people of Haida Gwaii. My English name is Douglas Wilson. In academic circles, I'm known as Dr. Douglas Wilson.
I went to Port Alberni Residential School, 1959 to 1970.
I went to the residential school in Cranbrook, BC. My first year was 1955. I went until 1963.
I'm a survivor of the Edmonton Indian Residential School. I was there from 1957 to 1961.
At age 5, I was kidnapped by terrorists in a gunboat. The RCMP had this gunboat. It was a RCMP boat with a gun mounted on it to gather children from villages.
We were segregated right from the day one. I remember in September we were all on a beach and we were all given numbers.
When I first got to school in Cranbrook, we were all given a number. My number was 54, and my underwear, my socks, my uniform, my towels, everything that I had a number. It was 54 on there. And all the girls had their own numbers. And if you were caught with somebody else's number, you got whipped for that.
We weren't allowed to have books, and we weren't allowed to read. If you were caught reading any kind of a book or a magazine, you were punished. There was a severe punishment that one.
The kids who told on us got preferential treatment, whereas the children who sang their songs and spoke their language were punished constantly for any little thing, for even for laughing.
It was always hard for us to tell one another we love you, because we were taught to love was wrong. They told us to love was wrong, that was the devil's work. But yet, these priests and nuns could hug and kiss. And we couldn't even hug our own brothers. We couldn't even hold them and tell them we loved them. It took me a lot of years before I was able to tell my boys I loved them.
3 years it took me to realize it, though, you know, of torture and pain, you know, being strapped at a young. You know, I lost my childhood when I first got there and never knew what it was like to have parents. Still hurts. Sorry about that.
It's all right, you don't have to apologize.
But I never knew my mother, and still don't today.
I couldn't remember any good times that were there because I was being punished for things I'd never done.
Like what kind of punishment?
Punishment by restraining me to the bed, by putting a restrainer on me and holding me down in the bed. I had bed problems as wetting the bed, and they would tie me in bed and put an electric underneath my sheet so that when it did wet, I would electrocute myself.
Did they put you in a hospital?
Yes, I did. Well, yeah, you give me some drugs or something like that.
What happened to you?
I don't know what kind of drug it was.
What happened to you when they gave you the drugs?
Hey? Oh, they put me in there like a padded room. Padded room, like? I was strapped down.
That was after you reported the girl?
Yeah.
Finding the girl's body?
Yeah.
I'd seen them burn hands of kids when they're 3 years old and 5 with a little spike in their hand and like that, like a shock thing.
Electric shock?
Yeah.
Device? Why did they shock the kids?
Because the kids wouldn't listen to the Catholic priests.
He used it on my brother's penis. He electrocuted his penis there till my brother passed out. And he was laughing, brother. My brother said he was laughing while he was doing it. We'd like to see him in pain, I guess.
And then the police force, I was involved in a few investigations regarding victims of residential school, where one particular individual had went home in the summer and learned how to speak his own language, and his dad had taught him how to carve. When he went back to school, he continued doing this, speaking his own language and carving. And the teacher caught him and took his knife away and broke his carving up. And he took a pencil and he drove it right through his hand. And you still see the scar where he drove the pencil right through his hand.
Then there was other times where they put us in a tub, and then they had a bucket of snakes, you know, them black and yellow snakes. And they'd throw that in the tub while we're having a bath. And the snakes they can't stand that hot water. They try to crawl all over our bodies, trying to get away from that hot water. They'd all just curl up because they die immediately. And that was some of the horrifying things that they'd done to us to discipline us to keep quiet.
Well, that's the kind of stories we're hearing every day. And like for 15 years, I've been bringing those stories out and making them public. And what was amazing listening to all of your stories is how similar the government and media cover-up is on all this, because at first, the churches, they weren't facing any lawsuits. They said, oh, they're just making it up. They refused to give it any credence. When the lawsuits began, they said, okay, but it's not our fault, it's the government's fault. They did this kind of mutual finger-pointing. But eventually I found after I'd been thrown out of the church, I started working full-time in the Native community, and I live and work in the poor part of Vancouver. It's got one of the highest HIV rates in the world, extreme poverty. It's like a third world society. And as part of that work, I started finding all these documents in government and church archives, which showed that not only were half the children dying in these schools over about a century, but it was happening deliberately because the and this is in our film, they would take healthy children and put them in the same dorm as kids dying of tuberculosis and then never treating any of them. And they'd just die off en masse. We even found letters from government officials saying this was happening as far back as 1910. Yet the whole pattern is that all of that stuff was buried, and now as it's begun to come out, the attitude of the government and church in Canada now is, okay, those things happened, but it wasn't intentional. You know, they were like dying off from like poor funding or something. You know, if you can imagine half the children in an institution just somehow dying year after year after year, and then them trying to pass it off like it wasn't because of anybody's bad actions. So one thing I learned is that the way, you know, the spin doctors really run these institutions, and they tell them exactly what to say in order to minimize the personal liability of government and church officials, and to try to create the illusion that it's what I call the bad apples theory. You know, it's the result of these bad individuals, but the system itself is basically good. The reality, you know, that we all live through shows the exact opposite, that in fact there's something at work here which causes it to happen all over the world again and again, and children are used and destroyed in this way, right? And so the situation now is that under pressure, the Prime Minister of Canada delivered kind of a lame-ass apology in June of 2008 where he said, you know, we're sorry that we broke up families. The thing to understand is that if you read the United Nations Convention on Genocide, look it up on the internet. It was passed in 1948. Your country ratified it, so did Canada. They have 5 definitions of what genocide is. Genocide is the intent to wipe out a group. It doesn't have to be a racial group. It can be a religious group. It can be any kind of group that's targeted and destroyed. That's called genocide. Point 5 is when you remove children from one group and put them into another. So the reality is that the system of foster care and the destruction of families is a form of genocide. Yet they say, okay, well, we did it, but it wasn't a crime. Well, no, the reality is what you're all going through and what's happening to children in the government system is a crime against humanity under international law. So I think what we need to do is, I mean, eventually what we need to do is get an international legal action in the human rights courts against every government, church agency, any group that commits these crimes against children, and name it for what it is. Because that's our power, naming what is, and bringing them to trial in that way. Because, you know, otherwise we're fighting separately and we're going to go down separately. And that's, you know, often been the experience. So right now, I think it's very educational when we're looking at the way the Catholic Church is responding to this, because again, the highest officials in the Church, including the Pope, are operating according to a policy that says you conceal the crimes against children. And what's interesting is there's no separation between church and state here on this, because the government at every level is colluding with the police and the government, colluding to hide these crimes. We went on a tour last week to Rome, and with me went 2 Native people who had survived these death camps, you know, that they went through. One woman, Clarita Vargas, she went to a Jesuit school in Washington. She saw, in 1971, she saw a priest take a newborn baby, because the priest would often rape young Native women and then take the baby and kill them to get rid of the evidence. She saw this Jesuit priest putting a live baby under the floorboards and then just burying it alive. And she went to the police last month. They have a lawyer, but it's like pulling teeth to get the police to do anything. She contacted the FBI 6 times, and they didn't even answer her call. The local detective finally went out with her to the school and said, okay, but we can't do a search without the permission of the church. Okay, so it's kind of like you go to a suspect, and you know, I don't know what the law is like in this country, but at least in Canada, if there's a suspect to a crime, you don't go and ask them if you can look around their house. You get a warrant. You know, you get a search warrant, but the police don't do this in relation to the church. Not simply because it's the church, but because they're colluding in this crime, that the government and the police are part of this, so they're not going to investigate themselves. So that's why, you know, our kind of strategy, and by I mean this community network I work with, because we haven't been able to work through institutions. It's only the power of people on the ground that's caused this to come out. And what we've done is we set up our own investigations. You know, we hold our own public tribunals. And thanks to the internet, we get it out all over the world. We need to make documentaries like that. You need to make documentaries about your own story and get it up on the internet. And we found that that's the kind of public exposure that finally gets action in some way. You know, it's something that we all learn in the course of doing this. So Why don't I stop there and just ask if you have any questions or things you'd like to say? Yep.
Can you tell everybody about the Queen Duke involvement? That was on David.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, the Queen of England it's one of the places the buck stops with this story, because with the Pope and the Queen, they were the two main actors in setting up the residential schools. The Church of England and the Catholic Church and the United Church were the main, runners of these schools. And we sent her and the Pope a letter 2 years ago asking her to help identify where these burial sites are, because there's over 30 of these graves near the former residential schools where a lot of these kids are buried. And the Queen never answered. But a couple of months ago on our radio program, I do a radio program in Vancouver, Co-op Radio, and William Coombs, who was a survivor of one of the Catholic schools in British Columbia, he said in 1964 he remembers that Prince Philip and the Queen came to their school for this little informal visit, and they took all the kids down to the river for a picnic, and then after they left, 10 kids went missing. She just took, somehow like 7 boys and 3 girls just kind of vanished, and they never saw them again. And so we wrote, one of the things I'm doing in London, we're holding, tomorrow we're holding vigils outside the Catholic and Anglican churches. And we're also sending a letter to Buckingham Palace asking her if she has any information on these missing children. Because don't forget, under the Nuremberg precedents in international law, it doesn't matter if you're a head of state. It doesn't remove your complicity in a crime. That's why they tried Goering, well, he killed himself, but that's why they tried the Nazis at Nuremberg, because they were colluding as heads of state in this crime. So whether it's the Pope or the Queen or any head of government, they can't hide behind their office when they're complicit in a crime. So that's one of the reasons I'm here, and we're also holding a thing outside the Canadian Embassy and trying to draw the links here and make the connections to show that this is an international network, and we all need to kind of be aware of that first of all and then act on that. Yep.
I was wondering, when the children went into the industrial schools, because American had the first industrial school, and then we had the Children's Act of 1908, then we had the new law, Act since 1998. So it's the law that got changed here then. But did they change the children's names and birth certificates? Mm-hmm. And did they also have Madeleine laundries?
Yes.
So did England have Madeleine laundries. It was classed as training schools, run by the same orders of religion. I know because I was sent there. Also, you're going to Ireland for another demonstration on the 14th, which will be Thursday. That will also be how many children died. Neither Ireland nor England, nor any part of the world that I know, seems to have produced the list of children who died in care. Mm-hmm. So you don't know the names because the names got changed. Yep. So you can't find the date of birth to find out when the children died. And then I asked, when the children died, and the women in the Magdalene laundries, who pronounced them dead? Because the death certificate had to be signed by 2 doctors. But we couldn't find that evidence either. So we asked, who gave the people the right to bury people? Were they burying children alive? Were they burying people alive? Also, Vincent Nicholas is also in the paper today for covering up sex abuse within the Catholic Church. So did Murphy O'Connor's know about it. Mm-hmm. So wherever we're going now around the world, we are gradually bringing it out. We know that wherever it happens, the basic people that are actually responsible, which people won't print, the newspapers won't print. It was the NSPCC in this country, and in Ireland, and in Scotland, and in Wales, that actually had us taken to court for a bounty to be charged and sentenced. Now, that charge and sentence, me as a baby of 2 years old, is still with me today. So when I got called up for jury service, I got turned down because I had to send it to the Law Society. I had to get in touch with Lord Rumford. I got in touch with so many people. But the Queen did answer my letter, by the way. She answered my letter within a week. So we go over the past. What we're trying to prove is you can hear so much about the past, that we cannot change. But it is what has been carried on to the future, where we're going back into the past on the 21st century. So how do you protect children today? It's not, we are becoming, even from next month, any child that's in care, there's going to be an SOS put out on the motorways and anything, everywhere if they're missing from school, for you to be stopped at the airports, the ports, anywhere, and it'll be put up on the motorways as well. So the children's law in this country is absolutely diabolical. We can't protect the children from the past, we can't protect them from the future. The only way people will get off their backsides is you have to demonstrate. Sitting there doing nothing, writing emails. It took me 11 years non-stop to get where I am today. Now, all my feelings, I don't cry, I don't laugh. You hear, but when I hear that in 2008 they were still going to experiment on children in care in this country, we had it in the Daily Mail. I spent a whole week because Ed Balls put him, Smith Wellcome Klein, on the board. Now, people say why? So I'm bringing it up to 2008. Because simply that every child that was in care in the past was absolutely experimented on. Then I ask, right, the NSPCC is out there. If the children have been abused, and they're supposed to look after children, why have none of the NSPCC come on board to examine these children?
Peter Mandelson's one of the patrons of the NSPCC.
So is the Queen. You see, so in this country, if your child is in care and you phone up the NSPCC, because the child is in care, the NSPCC does not get involved because they phone up the police, to phone up the social services. So nothing ever gets recorded. If any of you people go to see your children, your grandchildren in a centre, they only keep a record of an injury that happens in the centre. They don't record what happens to the children before they're brought into the centre. So you take the photographs and you ask it to be logged, because if you had inflicted them injuries on your children, they would have been taken off you. And stop calling carers foster parents. They're not foster parents. They're carers, that's all they're doing. And well paid at that. And who then decided that a social worker that's half my age knows better than me? And I have got one social worker sacked last year and 4 demoted, because me and him went into the director's office, Colleen Green in Coventry. Now then we found out that Sure Start is also part of social services. Do you know that they keep an independent book on you? Not what they write in the children's diary, but an independent book. And if you get a diary that says, my child got injured today, did that child turn up with that injury? Because they do examine the children when they go into Sure Start first thing in the morning. They examine them from head to toe. And then we found that children under the age of 5, once they're in care, are not allowed to go to any Sure Start nursery. They don't necessarily have even to be taken to a doctor. So that is in this day and age. So we need to do and protect the children in care today.
Go ahead.
There's a lot of adverts on the TV, everybody's seen them, haven't they, from the NSPCC, showing how all these children are really suffering and how terrible it is.
Oh, sorry. Okay. There's a lot of adverts on the television, as you know, with the NSPCC appealing to the general public how difficult it is, these children, and they're now saying that they're actually saying parents are harming the children, and they're raking in the money, and But the problem is, I think that a lot of the children that they're taking, they're actually, as we know, they're taking them off good parents. There's nothing wrong with the parents, but they're actually taking the children off. And the children that are actually left behind are the children that are being harmed, such as Baby P, Victoria Cleary. They're the high-profile cases that we know about. So I think there has to be something done about all this raking in of the money to, I don't know where the money's actually going. Where is it actually going? Because my mother saw a programme about a year ago on the television, and they had the guy there from the NSPCC, some top guy, I don't know what his name was, and she said there was a woman from a children's group, I can't remember the name of the group now, and she sat there, and there was this guy sat there on the breakfast television. She said, "You're bringing in all this money to help all these children. Where is the money going?" And he just kept avoiding the question all the time. So I think when people are actually paying out, because before my child was taken, I was contributing money to the NSPCC. And then when my child was taken, I didn't, because the NSPCC advised me to go to social services. You'll get loads of support, they said. I've got it on tape. You won't be judged yourself. I said, "But don't they take people's children away for no reason?" She said, no, that's rubbish. All the stuff you see in the papers, it's all hype. Not true at all. So, a year down the line, they take my child away, make up loads of lies about me. So I called her back. And I didn't manage to get hold of her at all. She left. And she'd also told me that she was very experienced, she'd been in social services. So I got another lady, she sounded about 18 or 19 from her voice. And I was trying to tell her what happened, and I said, on your website it states that if a child is at risk, you have to intervene. My child's at risk in care. You have to intervene. She said, "Oh no, we're just a helpline, we don't do anything." I said, "Well, put me in touch with someone that can help." Then all of a sudden in the background I heard a man's voice, and he said, "Tell the caller, thank you very much, we can't help you anymore," and then put the phone down. I said, "There's a man prompting you in the background." And then she hung up, and that was it. And I thought, oh my God, the NSPCC are not what they're claiming to be at all. They're something completely different. And somebody needs to investigate this, because they're taking people's money all around the country. Half the country's children are being taken away on false grounds, and the other half of the country doesn't know anything about what's going on. And we just have to educate it and spread the word to everybody. Everybody has to know what's really going on. Because it's really difficult for people that have had their children taken and they're innocent. If you try and tell someone that doesn't know what's going on, your child's been taken, immediately you've got a label on you. You must have done something. There must be something that you've done. And then you try and show them all the stuff that's going on. And they're like, oh my God, because I've got 5 boxes of paperwork. Most of it is absolute rubbish that's been written about me. Right. That's it.
Sabina, thank you for that. I'm just going to ask very nicely what we've got Kevin here.
That's all right.
We do
That's
ask
good.
him questions and let him come back. No, it's fine, because we're trying to get information out. So I'm not chastising, but just while he's here and the remainder of his time.
Yep.
Tell everybody about the Indian Act and the swine flu vaccination, which is what I think is
Okay. Okay, well, there's a thing in Canada called the Indian Act, and it means Indians who live on reservation are not citizens, they're wards of the state. So they're like a child under the law or a mentally incompetent person, which means under Section 76, they cannot refuse medical treatment or hospitalization, involuntary. So when the swine flu vaccines came out, they went out to the Indian reservations and were pushing them literally on people. And this is one of my friends is a public health nurse on the West Coast, and she got fired from the health department, Federal Health Agency, Health Canada, because she found that public health nurses were coming in and literally shoving vaccinations into the arms of babies while their mothers were being held back. And 2000, 2001, this was going on, and it's all been documented, but Indians can't refuse that under the law. So they're the canary in the mine shaft, if you like. They're the ones that everything's tried out on first. So when the swine flu vaccine came out, they went out to this remote little Indian village on the West Coast where I used to work. I used to go out there all the time. It's one of the most isolated Indian villages in Canada. You've got to travel by seaplane or boat for about an hour to get there. That's where the first official swine flu epidemic broke out in Canada, and it broke out about 2 weeks after they started injecting people with a vaccine. So about half the village came down with swine flu. You'd think it would break out first in a major city, but no, it breaks out in a remote Indian village, and it was, you know, that's what we say, well, these genocidal acts allow this kind of thing to go on. And well, at the same time, it came out in the press that the government of Canada was sending out body bags to all the Indian reservations at the same time. So it's kind of like a technique of traumatization. Like you traumatize people like when you take their kids from you in order that they won't resist, that they get, you know, it's a form of social control.
I take it then that body bags weren't distributed among the major cities?
No, only among Indians. Yep.
That's interesting to know.
Yep.
Kevin, you as a Christian minister, do you know what it is in the churches, which is supposed to be a God of love, that has woven into it such a degree of cruelty and bestial sexual depravity?
Well, you know, I often make a distinction between the teachings of Jesus and the whole tradition of Christendom, you know, where you have the idea, well, you know what a clue for me this was on this? About last week when I was in Rome, or just a few days ago actually, somebody told me, and I didn't realize this, when you stand at St. Peter's Square, there's this huge kind of semicircle of all these columns. Those columns are actually taken from the Colosseum. And in the 4th century, when they institutionalized the church and really it took over the Roman Empire and became the state, really, it was built with the columns from a place where they had been slaughtering people for centuries. You know, and I believe everything has a spiritual component to it, of course, and that energy of conquest and slaughter got interwoven into Christianity, so that you had this new synthesis develop where there was this thing called Christendom that said, we have to convert the world to this way of looking at things, you know, this faith, if you like, this religion, and we can use any means necessary to do it. You know, Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, all the fathers of the church, they're very clear that violence and torture are necessary to save the souls of a person. Like, trying to compare that to the teachings of Jesus, and I don't see any connection, but the church does, because it got synthesized together. And I think that's what we have to look at. That's led to an entire history of genocide and colonialism all over the world, and not just abroad, but here at home. Anyone who descended from the church, women, you know, dissidents, my family were Huguenots in France. That's why we came to England in the 1500s and then over to America and Canada. You can use any form of violence against a, quote, non-believer. And to me, that has nothing to do with the teachings of Christ. It's a new hybrid, if you like. And that's what I point to when I talk about the crime. Also, just people are, you know, when you're in a system like a boarding school and at the top, there's a policy that it's okay and necessary to treat children that way. People go along and look the other way because they know that was what you need to do to keep your job. And the humanitarian people are forced out. You know, I've spoken to people who worked in these boarding schools, and one woman tried to stop a little girl from being beaten, and she got fired because she was being too sympathetic to the Indian kids, right? And it's the same in the social services system today. If you show humanity, you're forced out, and that's why it's not going to be an institutional answer. It's got to come from people like you organizing the community and changing it. Yeah.
I agree with 99% of what you say, and I sympathise with it. But honestly, when you imply that the Queen and Prince Philip were implicit in the murder of 7 children, then I do hesitate. And I always say, sorry, but when you say that, when you imply that Prince Philip and the Queen were implicit in the murder of 7 children, that stretches credulity a bit. And I feel that if you go as far as that, you'll get people disbelieving all the other things you said, which really are true. That's all I'm saying.
That's not what he said.
Because they don't think like we do. I'm saying that they came.
10 people went missing. That's what he's saying.
Yeah, seven children were missing as a result of their visit. You know, I mean and then they didn't care, and they were somehow complicit in it. So I agree with 99% of what he says, and I sympathise with him. But if you go that far, you'll get people disbelieving everything else.
Well, I guess just I think the general point here is that that's what an eyewitness saw. And I made a point of saying that I don't necessarily believe they caused it or that they're complicit directly. But the reality is that even if they weren't personally complicit, as head of the Church of England, she is complicit legally. She's the head of a
An organization that planned and committed these crimes. So whether she did it personally, legally, under the Nuremberg precedents, if we're going to follow them, if we're going to follow our own system of law and morality, you have to pose these questions to the heads of these churches and organizations and hold them accountable. That's, I think, the main point. Who's next?
Hi.
Yeah.
You said that we've all got to get together, which we all agree with, obviously. And the internet is doing that, it's bringing people from all over the world. The trouble is, all the judiciary and all the solicitors, all the judges, seem to be on the side of the evil ones. How can we get over that?
Go ahead. Mike.
Hi, I've just got something to say, which is quite interesting. You know how you were saying before, thanks. You know you were saying before about basically Joseph picked up on that by saying about them saying people you basically blaming the Queen and so on and so forth. Almost it's like saying the same system for all these kids that were forcibly adopted during the 40s and 50s or 60s and 70s, whatever it is, in Australia, because you know, the Queen obviously is governor of Australia, you know, she's one of the people that's in charge of that. So in that way, is it that you're trying to say the same kind of system with that, if you're saying that she's got something to do with these other 7 kids that you're on about?
Sorry, I didn't quite understand the question. Just no, but I didn't quite get your meaning.
I think he's trying to ask, are you suggesting that the complicity that was involved in the Aboriginal system is the same as what's on in Canada, because the Queen's still head of state?
Yeah. Yeah, I do, yeah.
She's the head of state.
She is still the head of state in Canada, yeah.
Excuse me, a lot of people have accused the royal family of murdering Princess Diana. Newspaper rubbish. You know, let's get this right in proportion. Another thing I'd like to tell all you good people is when you mention social services and children have been taken, your children have been taken by corruption. I want you all to know that. One more little thing. I want you all to tell your young ones, your young children, as they're growing up, give them a form. Say, beware of social services. These are the things they can do to you. I never knew. I'm 74 years old. When they did this to my family, I never knew. That gentleman there over his stroke, he said how he used to doff his cap. I still doff my cap to authority. I respect authority. Yet they've done this dirty thing to my family. They've done it to you all. It's disgusting. And we will do it. We will do it.
I'm not accusing the Queen of being...
Okay.
I'm not accusing the Queen of being a child abuser at all, but I did write to her and I had a response as well about why the syndromes written by 2 American paedophiles, Richard Gardner and Ralph Underwager, were used in the English courts. And I didn't really get a proper reply about it. And so although I don't know whether the Queen even got my letter, it might have been intercepted by somebody else. You know, I did write to her. And I do think we have the right to answers about things like that. Nobody's accusing the Queen of... We do have the right to ask the monarch, who's supposed to be the defender of the faith in this country. And, you know, well, Jesus didn't like child abuse, did he? I mean, Jesus wouldn't have allowed child abuse. So, I mean, the Queen's supposed to be represented.
I was just told we have 5 minutes, so yeah.
Queen's not interested in my kids, so let us up on the blog. We've got a secretary to write to me. It's up on my blog, and if you want to spread the word, get yourselves a blog, right? It's easy, it's free. One have to say, put your paperwork, just cut the name out of your kid, take the birth and the medical numbers, insurance numbers, and we'll join you up. And what you've got to get is this: get some money, and if you get as many
Thank you. I just want to mention that, where I work, the way we operate in a circle is that we understand that wisdom is held by the group, and we acknowledge every point of view and say it's equally valid. And so I don't want to create the impression that, I value everything everyone is saying, and I think because of that, I always try to look for the commonality people have, and we can have differences of opinion, and it's really, misunderstandings are easy to happen. So we want to kind of avoid all that, because what I say to people wherever I go is that we need to come together. If we're going to the International Court of Justice or the International Criminal Court, we need specific affidavits with the actual evidence that we can take and show the complicity. And that's really what I would invite us to kind of work on together long term, to try to work on that together. And I hope we can find a way to do that. Yeah, there's a lot of, yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned earlier about going about it with the kids that disappeared when Prince Philip and the Queen went to Canada. You see the Chinese whispers thing where things over time get embellished. For instance, do you have proof? I mean, I don't want to answer now, but if you go too far back and you don't have any actual proof, and people's imaginations run away with them sometimes, and especially when you mentioned all the drugs and everything else that the Indians have been taking. But when you bring up to speed with the kids that were sort of transported to Australia and Canada and New Zealand and so on, and the thing that's happening now, this is tangible, you can taste it, it's here and now. So don't go too far back and create a division, perhaps with someone that may not have a full memory. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying it's wrong what you're asking. I'm not saying that those particular kids may disappear off the bank side. If you go too far back, you need to start, learn by history, now and the future.
Go, yeah, at the back.
How did you get on at the Vatican?
How, what happened? Oh, well, there's a law in Italy now where you're not allowed, all the parties agreed to this, you're not allowed to protest anywhere near the Vatican. So I just acted like the ignorant tourist, and we did anyway. If you go to our website, it's hiddenfromhistory.org, and there's a thing up on YouTube now about that. Yeah.
Kevin?
Yep.
What do you think happened to them 10 children?
I'm sorry?
What do you think happened to them 10 children?
What do I think?
Regarding the Queen, yeah.
I have no way of knowing, because it comes from an eyewitness, William Coombs, who claims he saw it. He has another friend who suicided now, he's dead, who also claimed he saw it. But I mean, again, I think we're losing sight if we focus on just that one thing, because you see, what the government does in court, they rely on this thing called false memory syndrome, where they say, you didn't really remember, you didn't really experience that, did you? It really happened from your parents, didn't it? It didn't happen in the residential schools. That's how they beat down and destroy witnesses in court, by creating doubt in the minds of a jury, which is what you do as a lawyer to win a case. You create a doubt. And the doubt they're creating is that people's memories aren't really valid ultimately. A victim's memory is not valid. Don't forget, at Nuremberg, the only thing they relied on, besides some documentation, is the oral testimonies of survivors. That was good enough at Nuremberg, and it's good enough now.
The Native Americans are allowed to vote in Canada.
As of 1960, they were allowed to vote, yes.
Okay. Has there been any in Parliament?
Pardon me?
Has there been any in Parliament?
Any Native members of Parliament? In the Senate, there was a couple of Native, but these are Senate appointments by the government. They're only about 2% of the population. They've got very little political, economic power in Canada. It's part of the problem.
Can I just say, please,
Yep.
that we have your DVD here, the documentary by Kevin Ammett called Unrepentant. It's exactly what Kevin has just shown you, but it's very, very good. It's in full colour. It's got very good documentation. It's just absolutely brilliant, and it's well worth having. It's here. We've got plenty of them. If you'd like them, please come and get them. I'd like another word after this, Brian, but I won't stop you just at the moment. But there they are, Unrepentant by Kevin Ammett.
Right, well done, thank you. Quick round of applause to Kevin. Come a long way.
Just if I may, because I watch the audience when all the talks are going on, and you can see emotions going up and down. We're talking some very heavy subjects, very heavy subjects. ordinary people
Get
were
in
in the
touch
room.
with
And what
Stuart
I mean is I
Sifray,
suspect
Senator
that
Stuart
most of you,
Sifray. He's in London.
I suspect that most of you
He's
know something about this, or you've experienced it. So there's a lot of knowledge in this room. But if ordinary people were here, I think they would be stunned at the moment by the time we got to lunchtime. By the time we got to lunchtime, not moving on to what has obviously happened to very large numbers of children. Now what we've got to do is package our knowledge in a way that, yes, it's going to shock ordinary people, because they need to be shocked awake. But when you do it, you take people up graded steps. Some people can only handle 2 or 3 things, and if you go too far, they switch off. Other people will take a lot more. But what we've got to do is get the truth out. Now, I've listened to the business about the Queen, and I'll just say something personal. On my wall at home, I've got my officer's commission from my time in the Royal Navy, and it says that I promise to faithfully serve my Queen and country, and I've got Elizabeth's signature on the bottom. But I have now watched for very many years for the Queen to stand up and speak out in defence of her subjects, us. And so far she has consistently failed to do so. Now there's another part to this, and I'm not suggesting you connect the two, but I just want to make a statement. Originally, I didn't know anything at all about this subject. Perhaps I was in a nice little bubble. And then I started to learn about what really went on out there. And then a friend of mine, ex-Special Constable Albert Burgess, said to me quietly one evening on the phone, he said, well, of course, Brian, what you've got to realise is that paedophiles are not dirty old men in raincoats. The majority of them are very smooth operators. And if you meet them in everyday life, you would think they're most wonderful people. And they're in suits. And so we have been trained to look around at ordinary people for the troublemakers, the mums and dads, and the slightly down and out people. But the people doing the worst of the perversions are actually the people at the top. They are the judges, they are members of Parliament, they are in the House of Lords. And so we've got to start turning the spotlight on those people. And the other thing is not very nice, but I was quite shocked and surprised to find that a lot of paedophiles are women. And this is something else that we need to think about. But what we've got to do is get this message out to ordinary people. And at the end of the day, I'm going to try and get everybody from the hole down here to moving away on something which is nice, but I did just want to comment on those 2 topics. I now look at the establishment very suspiciously. The more they purport to be doing nice things, the more we need to watch them. And the phrase, every child matters, which the government uses, does not mean every child matters that we make their life better. It means every child matters in our programme to reframe children to be citizens before they are connected, before and over and above connections with parents. The regime that's being formed, in my opinion, is very close to a Nazi, a fascist state, but we can also see that there are hints of a communist state in that, where children are taken away and people are taken into psychiatric systems to be experimented on. Now that's the reality, and what we've got to do is decide how to deal with it. And I am very optimistic we can.